The Bible begs you to take thinking seriously and begs you to recognize you can control your thoughts, and life is so much better when you do. But most people think a thought is something you have, not something you hone. And so they just let whatever thought show up, and then they go, wow, it's weird, I'm discouraged.
Hey, thanks for checking out Word Made Digital podcast on YouTube. My name is Joanna LaFleur. I'm the host of Word Made Digital, and this season, season 6, is all about the fruit of the Spirit. We're looking at what is the character behind the things that we do as creatives and communicators and leaders in ministry. So, thank you so much to Compassion Canada and to waybase.com for making this whole season possible. I want you to check out who they are in the links below. But for now, enjoy this video, enjoy this episode, and after you're done, check out tutorials, videos, podcasts, all the other stuff that we have as resources here on YouTube. Jon Acuff, welcome to Word Made Digital. I'm really pumped to have this conversation with you today. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me today. I think it's going to be a blast.
You are many things, author, speaker, and one of my favorite follows on the internet. And so I look forward to diving in with you today to get in your head a little bit about what's in your head, to get in your head about what's in your head. And so tell us about yourself, maybe for those who've not been familiar with you. Can you give a brief introduction as we dive into this conversation?
Sure. I have been married for 20 years this April. Live in Nashville, Tennessee with my wife and 2 teenage daughters. My background is corporate marketing. I spent about 15 years in corporate marketing. And for the last 10 or 12 years or so, I've been writing books and speaking about books. So that's kind of the 2 things I do all year is I write books and then I go to companies and speak about books. So I write business books. My dad's a pastor, grew up in the church, which can mean a lot of things. But for me, it means I've got a relationship with Jesus, crazy about Jesus. He's crazy about me. And that's kind of a quick and down and dirty background of me. I got into kind of online conversation by starting a blog a few years ago. Really enjoyed all the creative freedom the internet offered. And so I've been kicking around on the internet for a few years too.
Well, and how has your world changed? Everybody's world's changed in the last 12, 14 months. A lot of people may know you as someone who's spoken at an event that they've gone to. So with events changing, like large groups of people turns out might kill you.
Sweet word for you to say it, to describe it that way. Changing, canceled is another word. Yeah. So I mean, for me, last March, I texted a friend and was like, in March 2020, and I said, I think the first half of the year is going to be tough for a lot of people, which looking back is adorable. The first half of the year, as if like, all right, it's June, we're all done. Like we're all wrapped up with COVID. So no, for me, I really had to figure out, and this is such an overdone word, but it's just true, like how to pivot. Yeah. So I essentially lost my job, or a large portion of my job. When events got canceled, I probably had, 40 or 50 events get canceled or postponed. I've done a bunch of virtual. I've probably done 40 virtual at this point. But I really had to say, okay, well, what am I going to do next? What are the systems I'm going to build? Where am I going to lean into? I mean, like one of those answers was I'm going to do a podcast. I'd kind of been putting it off. I'd had one before that failed just tremendously. And so I was like, I think it's time for me to jump back into podcasting. So I would say I spent like 6, like maybe 4 grumpy months, like frustrated that, the thing that I'm best at, which is public speaking, didn't exist. But there was no degree of hustle or positive thinking that would change that. Like there was literally nothing I could do except go, okay, what am I going to do now instead? And I kind of came to a point where it was like, I can pine or I can plan. I can pine, the old way, I want it to be like this. Or I can plan and go, okay, here's the new season I'm in. What am I going to build out of this? And that's where I came to.
Yeah. Well, and as you kind of allude to there with this, you get in your head, it was a huge change for so many people. I mean, for the whole world had to stop, change direction, but for some people it was like drastic change to their livelihood. And as you say, you can get in your head about that. You can get stuck in the grumbling, the complaining, the what isn't. You just want to go back to the way things were. And that's kind of what this book is about. Did you write this during a pandemic? How, like the
No, I just
books, yeah. How did
the
that
timing was really fortunate in the sense of it was. You mean it was challenging in some regards because I didn't get to go talk about it live. I haven't yet. I look forward to that this fall. But the timing was really fortunate in that everyone is overthinking. So the book was done before the pandemic kind of really took off. And it was, for me, it was it was frustrating, the pandemic, but I was able to handle it better because I had spent 2 years researching how your thoughts matter and how to choose your thoughts and create your thoughts. So I felt in a lot of ways like the world got covered with water, but I just spent 2 years learning how to swim. And so I couldn't wait for the book to come back out because everywhere I looked, people were overthinking. The thing I've been saying is that right now, everything is a thing. So an example that I love to give is a couple weeks ago, somebody went to shake my hand. And right before I did, I thought, should I refuse? Should I give them an elbow? Should I fist bump them? Should I shake it, but then put my whole arm into a vat of hand sanitizer as if to say, I just need to scrub off the deadly pandemic you just tried to murder me and my grandparents with. And then I started looking around the room. Are other people shaking hands? What does it say about us politically? So all these thoughts went through my head.
Yeah, handshake's now a political statement. Oh my gosh.
Exactly. So 2 years ago, you know what I thought when I shook somebody's hand? Nothing. Now everything has so many thoughts and so much pressure. And so everybody's overthinking. And you know, when we worked on the book 2 years ago, the PhD, this guy, Mike Peasley, who helps me with my books, we asked 10,000 people if they struggle with overthinking, and 99.5% of people said yes. And that was 2 years ago. So just imagine how many people right now are overthinking. And so I felt really fortunate that I've been able to, this feels like an idea for me to steward, and I want to steward it to my best. It feels like an idea I received. I didn't force it. I want to steward it. That's how I feel about this book.
So you're mentioning Mike, PhD, smart guy you collaborate with on this stuff. And you did this research particularly around the power of positive affirmation. So
which I didn't want to do.
The soundtracks. Yeah.
I really didn't want to do that. I grew up, I'm sarcastic. I love humor. I'm skeptical by nature. I try not to be cynical. I think that's where it goes unhealthy. I think skeptical's fine. But it can go into cynicism. And so I grew up with, Serenity Now on Seinfeld or Saturday Night Live, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, doggone it, people like me. But I kept talking to leaders that I really respected, people that I looked up to that not just had worldly success, but have had heart success and family success. And if you'd get them off the mic or off the camera and go, hey, what do you think about positive thinking? They'd go, well, I got a little pep talk I do. Or, I got some declarations I make. Or, and I was like, no, I'm going to have to study this. And so we studied it. And it was really fascinating to see how being deliberate with your thoughts can change your actions, which changes your results. And from a biblical perspective, we shouldn't act surprised by that at all. I mean, Philippians 4:8, finally, finally, whatever is true, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, please think about these things, which is saying, think about positive thoughts, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Your mind matters. The Bible begs you to take thinking seriously and begs you to recognize you can control your thoughts, and life is so much better when you do. But most people think a thought is something you have, not something you hone. And so they just let whatever thought show up, and then they go, wow, it's weird, I'm discouraged. And I think even more so during the pandemic, I just caught myself one day watching a news program that had a running death ticker on it, like a slot machine. And I just thought, I can't go, I wonder where I feel discouraged. I'm watching it, and they're not doing that to inform me. That is to terrify me. And so I had to stop and go, wait a second, I don't think that's something I need to digest. Let me be deliberate about how I think, what I think. So that's really what kicked off, our study into affirmations.
Yeah, well, this whole series that we're in as a podcast, we're talking about the fruit of the Spirit. What is the fruit of watching the news ticker on Fox, CNN, whatever, counting deaths? What is the fruit of that? Fear, anxiety, paranoia.
You don't do anything with the information either. The idea of be informed is such a lie. It's such a lie. Because if you said to me, well, I need to be informed, tell me what you did knowing the death toll of Malaysia. What did you do with it that day? What did that information, did you go then donate? You didn't do anything with it other than add to the negativity, add to the fear, add to the stress. And so, I think we have to examine those things and go, you're right, what was the fruit of that? Was it a helpful fruit? Was it something that I did something with? Or was it just, did it add to the stress?
Well, and we see that, like, if we're focusing in on this episode, we're talking about peace of mind as my pivot from this soundtrack, this constant noise, the constant anxiety. We see this, what is the result or the fruit of this digital life we're living, this constant access we have to each other. People's lives and brains are so noisy. And so when you talk about affirmations, I think my leaning away from it sounds like new age mumbo jumbo, or sounds some like as you say, like Serenity Now, like sounds like some weird soundtrack they would play if I got a professional
like
massage.
a massage. Yeah, totally.
So talk to us more about this affirmation thing, because you're it isn't that the man meditating on the mountain. It's not the Gandhi
No,
thing.
not at all. I mean, again,
else.
like, I would tie it directly back to Philippians 4:8, where like, that is a list of affirmations. I choose to believe what is true. I choose to think about things that are lovely. I cultivate that. I look for that. I notice that. Like, I turn that into action. The problem with most times when we talk about thinking, we never tie it to action. We think about it holistically. We think, we see the nonsense on the internet that's motivational but doesn't mean anything. Like, whenever you voice a desire, the universe conspires to help you. No, it doesn't. The universe is busy being the universe. Like, it has very little concern with Jon Acuff. It's busy, like, jamming boats in the Suez Canal. Like, the universe isn't like, oh man, John said something. Like, that's not at all. And so for me, that's what I mean by that. So if somebody said, okay, I've got this negative thought, like, I would go real practical and go, okay, well, let's, the book talks about three things. Let's retire that broken soundtrack. Let's replace it with one that's true. And let's repeat that so often it becomes automatic. Like, and that's the step a lot of people miss. They go, okay, I'm told to pray unceasingly. Okay, well, what does that look like in a practical sense? What does that look like? I'm told to think about things that are lovely. Are you just going to hope that happens, like, organically? And then that's the thing, is like, your brain is kind of a jerk. Like, your brain does several jerky things to you. Number one, it distorts memory. You don't remember things accurately. You think it's a video camera. It's not. There's study after study that shows over time, your memories distort up to 60%. Number two, it confuses fake trauma with real trauma. It releases real opioids, even in the sense of fake social trauma. And so it's constantly going, all right, this is a big deal. This is a fight. Like, get ready. And the third thing it does, it has a cognitive bias. You believe the things you already believe. So if somewhere along the way you believed, I'm a bad mom, your brain is going to, like a magnet, collect examples that prove you're a bad mom. And so your brain's not helping you in that sense. The good news is you get to change that. You get to think lovely thoughts. You get to work at that. You get to have your mind transformed. I mean, we take every thought captive is not a passive verse. Like, it is not a passive process. It's an active process. And so that's what the book's about ultimately, is, okay, what are some simple things you can do with your thinking that actually are actionable? They're not kind of fuzzy and holistic.
Yeah, well, and the first step to that is actually recognizing there's a problem, like recognizing the soundtrack. Like, the last few days, I have had an old Pink song stuck in my head, and I can't get it out. It's
Was
very
it Don't
annoying.
Let Me Get Me? Which song is it?
I'm a hazard to myself. That
yeah,
song.
Don't Let Me Get Me.
Is that what it's called? I don't even know what it's called.
Yeah.
I
knew
like
exactly
Pink.
of the 50 songs which song was in your head. I don't want to say prophet, but clearly.
It's that earworm. I can't get this earworm out. This is the soundtrack. I just recognized, but it took me to this morning to recognize this is a very minor issue in my life, but to recognize that this was happening in my head over and over. And so help us get there. How do you recognize maybe
100%
quicker what's happening in your brain?
I'll give you a super easy, instant way to recognize a broken soundtrack. So think about a desire. Think about a desire God's put on your heart. Think about, a hope he's put on your heart. Okay, I want to be a missionary. I want to start a family. I want to be a wife. I want to be a husband. I want to write a Bible study. I want to start a podcast. Any desire, big, small, medium, whatever. And then listen to your reaction. Listen to the thoughts you have, because every reaction is an education. If your first thought is you're not qualified, who are you to do that? You've made too many mistakes. You're too young. You're too old. It'll be too complicated. Nobody wants to hear from you. Like, listen to that reaction. And once you have that, you take it to, if it's negative, and more than likely it's going to be, You take it to 3 questions. And the 3 questions are super simple. You say, is it true? Is this thing I'm listening to true? That's the first question. Second question is it helpful? Because sometimes the thing is true. Like if you said, I want to start a podcast and your soundtrack was, I don't know how to podcast, that's technically true. But is it helpful? Every time you say that, does it make you want to do a podcast more or less? Does it make you investigate? Does it make you take an online course? Does it make you read a book? The third question is it kind? If I said it to a friend, would they still want to be my friend? And I remember, I've been doing a lot of podcasts about the book launch, and I talked to a podcaster the other day, and in the middle of this conversation, he stopped and said, oh no. And I said, well, what's wrong? And he said, well, I've had the #1 podcast in my category for 9 months. And the soundtrack I hear over and over and over again is, you're just lucky, you're just lucky, you're just lucky. And he said, if a friend came over and had been successful for 9 months on something they cared about, I'd never say to them, you're just lucky. Right. So why am I okay saying that to myself, but not to him? And so those are the 3 questions you ask. And if you can't say yes to all of them, it's a soundtrack you need to retire.
Oh, I love that, because sometimes it is true, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually helpful to move you towards what you're
and the problem is true ones, even a true one will kind of deteriorate over time. No one accidentally thinks positively. In all the research, everybody we talked to, we didn't meet a single person whose problem with overthinking was that they overthought compliments. Nobody we talked to said, yeah, I just keep telling myself what a good mom I am. Like, it's a real problem. Like, I keep telling myself, what a natural leader you are. You're doing a great, like, nobody thinks that way. Like, here's how I say it. Like, fear comes free, faith takes work. Fear comes free. Like, fear is going to find you. The negativity, like, I've never had somebody say, yeah, I had to work really hard to remember a mistake I made 3 years ago. No, you'll be in the grocery store. And all of a sudden, like, the other day, I remembered a surprise party I had ruined. It was 18 years ago. And my brain was like, hey, you want to think about that time you ruined Tara's surprise party for her husband? Remember that? That's not helpful. And the problem is, even true ones will deteriorate over time. And so, like, I don't know how to do a podcast will deteriorate into, I'll never know how to do a podcast. And that's where it kind of, it mutates into something that's not true. It's certainly not helpful. And it's definitely not kind.
Yeah. Well, what you're talking about is it's the classic thing that interrupts your piece, is that, like, you're just sitting there and all of a sudden, I've seen you post about these kind of jokes online, like all of a sudden you're thinking about that awkward thing you said to someone in the 10th grade, a decade plus ago.
Yeah, you got dumped at the prom and you're like, I'm in my 40s. I don't need to remember, like, oh, remember the prom? That was terrible. Man, that was just the worst. Like, that's not helpful.
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to get into getting into your technique as you write in this book. It's a thing that you do, which is humor. I'm laughing as you're talking to me right now. You use humor in some particular ways. Can you talk about why you choose to write with humor, or how you use it as a technique as a communicator?
Sure. Yeah. I grew up seeing my dad communicate that way. I mentioned he's a pastor. He planted a Southern Baptist church in Massachusetts in the 1980s, which was unheard of. So he used humor to communicate with his audience. And so I really grew up around it. I grew up seeing it as a currency. Our family is funny. I'm not the funniest one in our family. I think my youngest brother, Bennett, is the funniest by far. So I grew up around it. I always valued it. And then the older I got, the more I realized that it's a great communication tool. And, Chris Rock, the comedian, says there's some things people won't listen to unless they're laughing at the same time. So I see it as a great vehicle to communicate truth. I think it makes truth really sticky. I think it illustrates a point really well. And so I just love to communicate that way. I enjoy doing it off mic and off stage. And so it feels authentic for me to do it on stage and on mic. And I'm really deliberate about it. And I work really hard to hone it and what's the right word, where do I want to use it to release tension here? Where do I want to use it to illustrate a point here? So it's become a really fun part of my process. And from a book perspective, the type of books I write normally aren't funny. So it gives me a chance to kind of stand out a little bit, to go, okay, they're usually serious and they're usually this way. And so when I communicate in a different way, and I think it's a human way too, people go, wait a second, that story was ridiculous, but I remember the point and I expected you to be this way, but then you zagged this other way and it was really fun. And it just makes it more fun to me.
And were you in your head about that at some point? Like, have you always just been comfortable doing
No,
serious
I'm constantly
topics
in my head
funny?
about it.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, like when people say like writing, you have to find your voice. I don't agree with that. I think you have to keep your voice. It's not like you find it once and you hold on to it. It's the slipperyest thing in the world. Like you get it and you're like, I got it, I'm doing it. And then you write and then you notice like it slipped away. And all of a sudden you're pretending you're like writing in somebody else's voice. Like all of a sudden you look up and you're like, oh, I'm trying to out John Piper right now. But my name is Jon Acuff, and I'm a terrible John Piper. I am the worst Rick Warren. I would
terrible say
Beth
that would
Moore.
be a positive.
Yeah, I'm the worst. So many other people. I'm a good me when I stay with my voice.
Yeah.
And so, no, I think I'm like where I've had to hold on to it is when, like the reality. I mean, if the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy, what does he steal? The good stuff. He doesn't steal the bad stuff. So like. He steals gifts. So if humor is one of my gifts, of course, when I sit down to write, I'm going to think, well, I need to be more serious, or, oh, I need to be like more like so-and-so, or I need to, be a serious author. So no, a lot of my first drafts are boring and dull and serious. And then I go, wait a second, that's not me. Or my wife will go, I read that whole chapter and you're not in it at all. That's not your real voice. And I'll go, you're wrong. Like, I'd love to say I received the feedback like the vitamin it is instantly, but I usually am like, you don't know what you're talking about. And like an hour later, I'm like, you were right. This is not that good. I need to change this. So yeah, it's something I definitely can get in my head about it.
Well, and humor is challenging because it's subjective, but you're working with a team of, an editing team. You're writing a book that you want to make funny, but not everybody's humor is the same. So how do you wrestle that out in the editing process?
Well, I mean, they're like, it's probably the most personal thing. So like, I have to say, like, I told somebody the other day, an author said, hey, what if an editor wants to do something different? Well, like, one, I trust the editors. Like, there's a reason I'm working for them. They're great. They're making the book so much stronger, which I really appreciate. When it comes to the humor, I'll say, okay, are they right? Like if a bunch of people didn't get the joke, is it only funny to me? Because that's what you're constantly doing is going, is it only, and even if you're not funny, you're going, is it only interesting to me? Mm-hmm. Is it only fascinating to me? If this is something I'm nerding out on, but the general population won't be served by this. I remember I had an editor once and I had this crazy long story about this rat in our garage. And like, I thought it was hilarious. And she was like, but it doesn't serve the reader. Like it doesn't move the narrative along. It doesn't illustrate the point. It doesn't strengthen. It's not helping them. So ultimately, like I took that whole thing out. Like it was really fun for me to write and I could share it somewhere else. But in the context of a book, I want it to be lean and actionable and helpful. So I'll definitely have funny things in there that I think are, will catch you off guard. But they can't just be funny to me and they can't just be, verbal gymnastics where I felt like we've all read books where you're like, oh, that was fun for that person to write. It did nothing for the rest of the book. Right. And maybe if the editor had more power, they could have gone, yeah, I know you're famous and important, but this is like snooze fest, or this isn't, how is this? Like my version of that is whenever a pastor tells a really funny story not related to the sermon, it feels like a hard, awkward left turn where they go, football story, hockey story, and they go, now let's talk about God. And you're like, those two ideas are not even remote. They're not even cousins. Yeah. They're not at the same family reunion. And so my job is I always tell people like there's main ideas, which are islands, and then there's bridges to the next main idea. So as a communicator, I'm constantly going, where's the bridge? Where's the bridge? And if I can't bridge it, you leave everybody on the first island and you never get to take them where you're trying to take them.
That's right. Well, and how do you work that out? I want to talk about your social media presence because I think it's quite unique. Sure. It's one of the reasons I love to follow you. I try to curate under 500 follows, which is really tough because there's always new interesting people coming. But you're one of the ones that always stays because I enjoy what you do. I'd love to get in your head a little bit about that. Is that a place where you test out your humor? You seem to be such you're a person who I think brings like the shoes that are fitted with the gospel of peace. Like I think you bring peace, kindness. You represent the fruit of the Spirit on the internet. I'd love to know what your approach is to social media.
Yeah, I mean, I think I learned a lot of that. I had a blog called Stuff Christians Like where I wrote about some of the funny parts of faith. And I learned that the key to that was to, if I'm going to hold up a mirror to Christianity, to make sure that I'm beside the mirror, that I'm part of the reflection, not forcing the mirror and going, look how bad you guys are. Like, and the only finger I'm going to point is the finger at myself, to go like, hey, here's this thing I did. This is silly. Like, and I never wanted to create a spot where people could show up and attack someone else. So I would try to write about an idea, not an individual. So that, that changes it. If I go, hey, here's an idea I think we need to talk about versus look what this person did, like people show up and it becomes like chum for sharks. And I didn't want that. Like there's enough places on the internet. And the other thing is that like, I wanted to be able to speak in love later, which meant I didn't get to mock. Like the Bible is super clear about mockers. Like they don't come out well. Like in the Bible is not like fuzzy about that. So I always tried to temper. And there was times I got it wrong and I'd have to delete something, or I'd go, wow, I blew it on that. Like that's not what I intended. That's a real person with the problem with the internet is it turns like individuals into ideas. It flattens people into 2D. So like you'll go, I hate that. And you'll go, what about your neighbor? And they go, oh, that's Mark. That's just Mark. And you go, but you would never say that about your neighbor. So that's part of the challenge of the internet to me. And so I try to be really deliberate. I want it to be really funny, but I also don't want there to be a victim of the humor. Because if there's a victim, then I feel like, I've gone
unless the victim's
too
yourself,
far.
You mean like you're making your sort of
if the victim's myself and I go, here's this thing I did, it was ridiculous, then I'm sharing a story and there's vulnerability there. If I go like, this is crazy, here's an example. Like I'm fine talking about like one of the jokes I did in a speech, I was talking about how we greet people when they come to church. And I said, why does every worship leader assume I had the worst week? Because a lot of them do this little sermon at the beginning, go, we don't know what you brought in here today, but we know your week was garbage. And we don't like that's never how anybody else communicates. Nike ever goes, hey, look at you out of shape. Boy, you look terrible. Would you like to maybe get a pair of shoes? You're gross. Yeah. They never say that. They talk about, we're glad you're here. We're like, and so I joked about why does every worship leader say it that way versus going, maybe you had an awesome week and we want you to come celebrate with us. Maybe you had a challenging week and like, we only have one size fits all and it's miserable. Now I'll share that because I feel like that's a broader issue. Where I blew it, like an example of blowing it would be, like I wrote a joke about when worship leaders step back from the mic, and some of our worship leaders at church were doing that. And I think that that probably hurt their feelings because it felt like I was writing about them. And that was not my intent because we have awesome worship leaders. So there's times where I'll go, okay, the general I can talk about, like the specific, if there's somebody really involved, like I don't like, that's not what I'm trying to do. There's enough of that humor online and I don't need to add to it.
Yeah. And what do you do then? I mean, it's the comments section that always, the comments, the replies, that can get into the fights, right?
Like, no, I always tell people like I run an awesome-ocracy, not a democracy. So if you're a jerk in the comments, like mute, block, delete, like you're gone. Like why? I don't like, I'm not trying to, rehabilitate you. Like this isn't for you. Like bounce. Like I'm not running a church on my Instagram. Like, and so I don't put up with a ton of that. Especially if you want to, if I go, I love oranges and you're like, here's the problem with Trudeau. I'm not here for that. Like that's, or like, here's the problem with Trump. That has nothing to do with me saying I like oranges. Like, so yeah, if somebody's dominating the conversation that way, I try to be kind about it, but it's also like, it's a free Instagram site. Like if and I didn't ask you to follow me and you're attacking somebody else. So I don't try to control my comment section because who has time for that? Like that's exhausting and they're grown adults. But if somebody is being abusive, like, kick rocks, like you're out, let's go.
Yeah, I love that. And I love what you just said, actually. The difference between you and an actual church, one of the many differences, is that you aren't a church and you're not trying to like do therapy with people in the comments section.
No. Like, and I don't know what their deal is. Like the problem is the person that throws a rock has usually forgotten by the end of the day they threw a rock. The person who got hit with it will remember that for the rest of their day. Definitely, maybe the rest of the year.
Well, that's so the soundtrack. When somebody says something with them.
Exactly. When somebody says something terrible, they might have done that on 50 other accounts. They don't even remember. But the person they said it to, it left a mark. And so my thing is like, I think like it always kills me. And I haven't written about this yet, but like when somebody famous, when I see an article and it's like famous person X claps back or responds to somebody who said something mean to them, it breaks my heart because it means 80 comments deep, they were reading that comment and responded to somebody who had 14 followers. And you go, you're worth $50 million. You have all like, and that one person was still able to to get to you. So I think that there's a time for you to go, I can't read all this stuff. It's not what I'm supposed to be doing. I have my circle that gives me feedback. And the other thing I'd say, my wife taught me, here's a soundtrack. Criticism that costs the person nothing is worth nothing. So it took them 12 seconds to leave a comment. That's worth nothing. When a friend of mine that I run with and pray with goes, hey man, I saw some posts of yours. It really felt like you were really trying to get people to tell you you're amazing. Like, is everything okay? And I'm like, that's worth a lot. Like, that's it. Like, so I have to remember that costs them nothing. It's worth nothing. If somebody writes a long, well thought out comment on my podcast about like, hey, I wish you would talk less so people could like, wow, that costs them something. They had to write, like there's time there, there's effort. So you have to go, not all criticism is the same. To pastors though, I'd say, I think pastors get an unfair kind of disadvantage because people say, just ignore the haters. If there's somebody at your church and you're in the lobby and you're doing life with them and it's somebody you're shepherding, that's completely different. So I try to draw that distinction. Like how I treat people at Instagram is not how I'd say to a pastor, like, just kick them out, whatever. Like that's different. That's real life.
Yeah. So, we are kind of coming to a close here, but you have a lot of examples in your book about soundtracks, anthems, new anthems that people can have to correct, change, rearrange the music that's playing in their head. Can you give us one or two that are helping you have that, not the Gandhi sitting meditating on the mountain, but true peace in your life or peace of mind in your day-to-day? Peace of mind when you get that crappy comment thrown at you, when nobody's booking you because the pandemic happened. What are one or two of those statements and anthems that you want to keep on repeat that you'd offer to other people?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, light and easy is one. My wife, that's the biggest one from the book, and it's based off the verse in Matthew where Christ says, my burden and my yoke, they're light and easy. Because 4 years ago, my wife was like, you're a jerk for 2 years when you write a book, and you're a jerk for 2 years when you sell it, and that's not going to work. Like, I'd rather you be a happy plumber than a miserable writer. And part of that's, like, writers have terrible soundtracks. We say things like, the writing's easy. All you have to do is open a vein and bleed on the page. Like, we're so dramatic. Like, got to go to the coal mine to write. Like, and so I had to deliberately years ago say, no, it's light and easy. So one that I think about all the time, I just started working on a new book. That's what you do as an author. You release a book, you write a new one. And I'm like, oh yeah, light and easy. It needs to be light and easy. So, okay, it's going to be light and easy. So another one that I remember that I really think about a lot is that favor beats hustle. Favor beats hustle. I'd rather be, blessed with these things than think I have to hustle my way to them. Like it just does. It always or I'll never out hustle God. Like whenever I think like it's John's turn, I got to jump in there. Or like another one is the best things of my life were received, not forced. Like the best things in my career, the best thing in my marriage. Like I didn't 10 years ago, plan, or like 30 years ago, plan, here's how I'm going to meet Jenny Calvert. And we're going to do, I didn't do that. Like those are the best things are received. They're not forced. Or another one I'll remember, like a soundtrack for me is God will never be handcuffed by my failures or unleashed by my successes. Like he'll never be handcuffed by my failures. So there's never a time where I go, I blew that thing and he goes, oh, I wanted that to happen, but you're not good enough. So it's not going to. Like he doesn't need me to do the thing he's going to do. He invites me into it because he loves me. And I get to be part of it. But his success isn't based on my abilities. Thank goodness. Like, can you imagine if God was like just as big as Jon Acuff was capable of? Or if like God was just as big in a city as a pastor was capable? Like we'd all be in so much trouble. Yeah. So he will never be handcuffed by my failures or unleashed by my successes. So you talk about peace. Like there's peace there versus going, this all depends on me. Like I can't find an example in the entire Bible where God says it all depends on you. Like you go do it. Like you go figure it out. And so if I can sit in those, like I get to be, like it says in Psalms, a man or a woman who dreams. Like we, when the captives were returned to Zion, they were like men who dreamed. That's what I want.
Do you Do you ever find it less weird to say any of this stuff out loud? I know, like that look in the mirror, say something to yourself. Has that gotten easier?
No. I mean, it's gotten easier the more I talk to people about it. Like, I think the braver I get and the more I see, also like the more I see results, like the more that like I would say like there's times in my life where it's been a smaller success by the world standard, but I've enjoyed it more. And I go, oh, that's that God math where like there's deeper joy. Like, and I've also had things where it was a bigger success and I enjoyed it less because I had to maintain it. And so like the more I see it, like see the benefits of it, the less weird it gets. But there's still like, I'm doing, I'm talking to a big company about those 3 questions. Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it kind? And I know that like the is it kind will be the one that people kind of push back on because it feels fuzzy. It feels, how do you tell a room full of salesmen and saleswomen like kindness matters? But I also know I've done the work of going, Google did this fascinating study and I put it in the book. They wanted to know what do our best teams have in common? The best teams at Google, what do they have in common? So they spent millions of dollars, studied 180 teams, 35 different statistical models. And the number one thing that all their best teams had in common is what's called psychological safety. And psychological safety means that on a team, you can ask questions, admit you're wrong, and suggest new ideas without being judged unkindly. And so at the end of the day, kindness was the most successful part of the most successful teams. And so I know I'll do a good job, hopefully, of going, hey, I know kindness sounds soft. It sounds like it's, you got to go. You got to grind. You got to hustle. But here's what Google found out. Here's what Harvard Business School found out. Like, here's what we should all know. Like, you get, like if people can't admit they're wrong, no one ever takes responsibility for mistakes and you repeat the mistakes. If people can't suggest new ideas without being judged unkindly, they stop having innovation. Like, we know those things are things our teams want. So I think if I do a good job, I can relate some of this stuff that might on the surface feel soft or fuzzy or not related to performance and say, no, it's actually connected. Like, this is actually how you were designed to live.
Yeah. I love that. It sounds like a lot of your writing, it's coming out of personal experience, your own journey, but also it's even in the work of writing. I love that what I'm hearing you say is you're helping yourself while you help all of us. So
100%. I'm in the trenches. Somebody said that. They said, part of what's fun about your writing is that you're still making mistakes, but you'll talk about them and you'll grow from them and you'll share the things. So yeah, I feel like I'm an explorer and I go, here's this thing, I'm not good at finishing. Let me figure out how to finish. And then I do a big study and we go, hey, here's how you finish. And I bring, other people in the conversation. That's been a really fun writing process for me.
Well, if people want to join your journey, they want to see what's in your head, they want to just find your content, find this book, where do you want to send people on the internet?
Yeah, I'd say the first place is check out my podcast. I did an interview with a woman named Colleen Berry. She lost her job as a documentary filmmaker, had to take a bunch of small jobs. One was a receptionist, and she decided to change her mindset about that work. And she's now the CEO of that company where she was a receptionist. And it's an amazing story. Wow. And she's an amazing woman. So the podcast is called All It Takes Is a Goal. So I check out that episode. And then online, I'm acuff.me, so acuff.me. And then Jon Acuff on Twitter, Jon Acuff on Instagram. So I'm all the places.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time today. This is
thanks for having me. This was fun.
Changing our soundtracks. It's awesome.
Appreciate it.